I'm very happy to be here. 2.5 years ago, I was also here in these same rooms with a piece called Nachlass. Some of you might have seen it. And it was a piece where people that now mostly are not alive anymore created something about or a situation for people that are experiencing their biographies in a certain way in their absence. And I was only here for 2 days, shortly. And now I'm here present during 10 days. So in a way, it's a first, not contradiction, but complementary kind of incident about presence and absence, because the whole piece, Nachlass, was about the absence of the people in this performance. Although they were very present, they physically were not there. And now I'm here, and actually we started working 2 days ago with young artists, not only from Rome, but from many places, also other countries. And a lot of our first improvisations actually suddenly turned out because I asked them to present what they're working about and what they are busy thinking, and I think 5 out of the 16 people kind of created immediately something that had to deal with the fact that we're here where the bodies of animals were slaughtered at some point, and that the absence of their dead bodies with their own, friction maybe with their own young bodies becoming artists or being artists on the merge to become big artists is another layer. So absence and presence is probably a bit what will be guiding me through a number of works which I think I'm going to present and talk to you about. And I'll start with a piece that is very much about the presence. It's a piece that we created, actually the first time 12 years ago in Berlin. And since then we've done it in many cities. And it's a piece that we created because we wanted to have the entire city on a stage. How can we represent an entire city on a stage? And first, we looked then at the numbers, like what does a city look like? This is São Paulo, for instance. And when you ask the basic demographic numbers of São Paulo, you see there are 53% women, only 47% men. And these are the color, racial profiles, which in Brazil play an important role for statistics because they want to then help. In Germany, you could never do that, like racial profiling and statistics. But here in Brazil, it makes sense so that certain minorities get more access to certain places. Civil states, place of residence, and the age groups. And we, in this performance, have 100 people on the stage because the 20 million, probably nobody knows exactly how many people live in São Paulo, don't fit on a stage. So we select 100 people in such a way that they exactly represent those demographics. So we will, for this performance in São Paulo, which I think this one happened maybe 4 or 5 years ago, we needed exactly 2, 4, 5, 6, I think I see there, 0 to 4-year-old toddlers. And we also needed 5 70-plus-year-olds. I don't know how these would play out if we would represent 100% Rome. In the moment, we're casting for 100% Brooklyn, and the BAM didn't want 100% New York for some reason. They said stick to Brooklyn, and it kind of is contradictory because there you totally have a distorted image of the rest of America, because I think 4 out of 5 people voted for Clinton and not for Trump there, and you have a very high percentage of Black Americans, and you have a high percentage of Asians as well there, of Jewish people. But it is always a kind of a portrait of the city. Now, how do you, this is a sociological analysis, but how do you do that on the stage? And let's just jump. We only cast the first person. That's the basic rule for this performance. We choose the first person, and the first person is always somebody that helps us to find these numbers, statistics. So in Brazil, it was somebody working for IBGE, which is the National Institute for Statistics. And then he chooses the others. He will explain to you how.
A categoria mais difícil de encontrar foi homens com mais de 65 anos de idade e que moravam na Zona Sul. Eu, por exemplo, sou homem, moro aqui no centro, na Consolação, sou solteiro, tenho 44 anos, sou pardo. E usando um método de relação em cadeia, nós escolhemos 100 pessoas. E eu apresento aqui o Bruno, que é um amigo que eu conheci, é um praticante de budismo, da filosofia que eu pratico, e ele recita Não Me Horror Ninguém Que Eu Comigo, e eu o convidei para participar dessa amostragem aqui.
Bom, meu nome é Bruno, eu sou um futuro arquiteto, eu estou sempre em movimento, eu gosto de conhecer lugares novos, pessoas novas, sou viciado em novidade. E eu apresento a minha amiga Carmen.
Eu sou ilustradora, trabalho com artes, amo artes, entre essa paixão tem outras que é a natureza.
Okay, so we see basically the first scene shows one after the other talking about who they are, and some talk a little bit too long because actually they have the right only for 10 seconds. But you see that, well, in the beginning part we only have people that are older, but we also need people that are very young. So at some point, oh, well, so here we have the first child, okay, presenting or not presenting himself. And so it goes on, this kind of chain reaction, which like one person asks the next person to come in, and towards the end of a process that normally takes around, we say 100 days, more or less, in the end of this process, it gets more and more difficult, obviously, because in the beginning you can basically invite everybody you want, but then it's always, for instance, very difficult, much easier to get women than men to participate, especially men between 30 and 50-year-old, where they think like the career is really like they cannot miss out on work. Or so we have to correct a little bit because we need them as well. We need also the men. We also have to correct a little bit if we don't find enough very old people who are a bit more shy in taking part of it because some of them are just physically having the problem to come on stage. So it gets more and more difficult, but normally we manage in the end. And then we can represent statistics. For instance, the statistic of the age group. So here is the oldest woman of São Paulo on our stage.
Me fizeram e eu nasci. Agora eu vou dar 8 passos. Eu vou dar 8 passos lá no centro para cada 10 anos da minha vida.
So this is a vertical camera, and we kind of project this age chart thing.
Seus lugares. Prontos, preparar, já.
So here you have the age chart, the age pyramid. I'm from Switzerland. In Switzerland, a lot more people would stay around the 80 years old people. So these are still statistics as you could just look at them up. What we do is we replace the numbers by human faces. So that is the change, but still these questions could be asked. There are questions which are normally not asked in the statistics. For instance, what do you do at what time of a day? That's what is happening in this scene.
São Paulo, às 9 da noite.
São Paulo, às 10 da noite.
We normally only have like 4 rehearsals per city, so we don't rehearse with them what exactly they do.
São Paulo, às 11 da noite.
we just basically tell them, do whatever you would do at this time of the day. And obviously
São
Brazil,
Paulo, meia-noite.
self-understanding is very sex-driven in some corners of the society. So all of this finds automatically kind of its representation in its cliches,
São
in its
Paulo, 1 da
contradiction. People in Australia, we did 100% Melbourne, they were all asleep by this time, and they would be at 6 o'clock in the morning standing up. Brazil does it a bit later.
São Paulo, às 3 da manhã.
But then we also ask, some dancing still.
São Paulo, às 4 da manhã.
And then we start to ask content question as well.
Quem chorou nos últimos 15 dias?
So eu means io, and there on the right it says not me, so
Quem tem um animal de estimação?
kind of harmless questions in the beginning. And then gradually this display of groups becomes a bit more kind of profound in So in a way, in the essence, it's a performance about groups of belonging. We think these days that groups are basically we are surrounded only by the virtual groups that we are friends with on social media maybe, and we forget kind of that we have very physical neighborhoods that we belong to. We often don't know the people that live in the same houses. And here, what is always quite an interesting friction happening during the performance-making process, when these people come together and rehearse during 1 week with us, is that people that know of each other, they know I'm not the only person suffering from depression, for instance, and suddenly they meet there, or I'm not the only one that would kill to defend my household, or whatever the questions are. Maybe we can skip once into another culture. So this was in Gwangju in South Korea. And the performance is obviously a very different one in each city, because it is really mirroring the city in its being together. And in Gwangju, for instance, there's only 1% of people that have a foreign passport. That is also a part of it. We have light today on stage, because the truth of statistics is always also a partly manipulated truth, because people might not tell you the truth. On the stage, it's the truth under which you would like to be seen, but there are limits to how truth you might want to be on the stage. And in each city we find out what are the taboos. Yeah, that's also a question that is very different responded in each city. In Vienna, I remember we asked it on the first day, we still had like 10 people standing there, and then with every rehearsal there were less and less, because people started telling them, death penalty, you shouldn't be seen there. But there are some questions where people might not want to publicly display their answers. And we, at some point, figured out we need to invent a scene for these ones as well. So we gave them spotlights, torches, with which they answer certain questions.
낙태한 적이 있는 분.
So
동성에게 끌려본 적이 있는 분.
So this is a question which wouldn't at all be a taboo, I guess, here to ask, or at least in Germany we normally would ask that in the light, but in South Korea it's a huge taboo still.
성매매를 해보신 분.
다시 태어난다면 다른 배우자를 선택하겠다는 분.
So this question really freaked me out because I would never have had the idea to ask it, but then somebody, we always have a bit of a run-up process when we're making the piece, and somebody suggested, why don't you ask this question? And it turned out that divorce is such a taboo in South Korea that it's not forbidden, but you might lose your job if you get divorced. So people stick with the partners they have and wait for next life. It's always a very interesting process to find out what is the question that we have to ask in the dark. So we always work like with a local dramaturg or artistic group. It was in Malaysia that created it together with us there on it. And we're normally making these kind of book publications. I'll leave it, or actually I can pass it around. This was Amsterdam, is the one that I have right here with me, where you kind of have the 100 people. Like with the workshop, we were just discussing in the hour before what could be people that could, for some reason, not be against this topic, could not be on stage, or which are the people that should maybe be on stage. And this performance really kind of developed into something which we never thought we would do that in so many cities in the beginning. We just actually thought we will create this for Berlin and that's it. But then it turned out that it's a demand, or it's something that theaters really want very much, to display people that are normally not in the theater. Because what happens is that we often then ask, or there's an open mic situation where we're asking who has been in this theater before, and obviously most of them haven't. And the audience also being asked the same question, also a lot, they bring obviously a lot of people with them to the theater. It's quite a loud performance as well, because people start to cheer for certain groups. You're from my neighborhood, or you are saying, I don't know, the thing about death penalty I always wanted to say. And also it's a loud performance, I guess, because a lot of people that come to see this performance have not been to theater before, so they don't really know what's the codes of conduct in the theater. Yeah, so that's one project I thought I would show, which is about presence, and then there is the other one before we start to be more and more absent, is a project about truck drivers. So I started working years ago after having done a lot of hitchhike in my childhood about truck drivers, and I figured out they're really good stories that they tell you when you're hitchhiking with them are stories that they tell you when they're on the steering wheel and when they're kind of seeing landscape passing by, and then the stories come one after the other. And so I figured out if I want to have them on a stage, it cannot be such a stage, because they wouldn't have anything to do. So what we did is we transformed the truck and to tell a story about their movement. And so I'll just show a bit how it looked in Lausanne. So this is the truck into which $50 people can go inside. So legally now it's a bus.
Je m'appelle Roger. Je suis né ici à Goma.
Yeah, so you have African music because the project here is called Cargo Congo-Lausanne, but there have been many versions of this project. And it's called like that because Roger, he is born in Congo, but lives now since 10 years in Switzerland, in Lausanne, where we created this performance. But he has a very interesting story about having been a child soldier in his origins and now being basically somebody that drives all the products that we buy in the supermarket. And he's a Swiss truck driver, 70-year-old. So he's just retired, and he has done everything illegal on his career of truck driver, overloading, and so on. So this is a live camera from the truck, and they're driving, and now we're kind of leaving the theater. And as they say, we're traveling from Congo to Lausanne. So in the moment when they're inside, we start saying this is Congo, and we start projecting Goma, actually, which is where he grew up, Roger. And you kind of see it passing by, but this is still projection.
Ici, on me voit sur la photo. Je suis au milieu. J'étais tout petit. Je vivais encore à Goma. Je suis au milieu de mes deux cousins. Ça, c'est une photo de ma mère. Ma mère, elle était jeune. Elle avait que 15 ans quand je suis né. En fait, elle avait rencontré un monsieur, un architecte suisse, et après elle était venue en Suisse. En fait, elle vivait entre la Suisse et l'Afrique.
So basically, sorry for it has no subtitles, but basically we're getting closer now to the border of Rwanda in the dramaturgical layer that is fictional of a travel. And then at some point he will get out because we're for border control. And then the screen where you just saw the projection, it kind of moves up. And
ici nous sommes à Gisenyi. Nous sommes maintenant au Rwanda.
so it actually was a camping place, but they have these barriers that just look like borders. So we try to find things that look like Rwanda on the way, including we have in this case a dancer that is outside every now and then, like a little Fata Morgana piece of fiction in areas where you would normally as a pedestrian never go. So here we walk along a deposit of a supermarket where all these things that you buy next morning in the supermarket are brought in by the truck drivers. There is a moment when we did the ferry transfer on our fictional travel from port of Tanzania to Antwerp with a lot of water. And then we meet always a lot of reality out there, which confronts with our fiction. The reality, for instance, of these people that are driving, sleeping just in the cabin. And there is a DJ, a sound artist on board that kind of live syncs or how do you call it? Makes music to this, what feels very much like a film, actually. When you're inside it, it feels like you're in a cinema. Because it's like a big camera which frames the reality outside. But obviously there are a lot of unpredictable factors. There are some predictable ones, like the lady on her bike, we install her there, but around there are traffic jams, there are sudden rains, there are everything that truck drivers basically meet. So there is a part which we can have them talk about their life, about their love for heavy metal music in the truck, but there is also a lot of unpredictable factors, which I like to confront always. Theater, which is, the French word répétition, means the rehearsal where you constantly repeat the same thing to make it better and better, but actually the uniqueness of theater as opposed to cinema, for instance, is exactly that you can't precisely define it, and the moment that things can go wrong, the accident that could happen here, and you're kind of in the hands of the drivers that might become insecure because they also have to deliver a line of text, is making it interesting in its togetherness, I guess.
amarira aseseka, buchasa zangu mwemu batatu, umukurumu botwa zingaranye, ati subashenge bizizine, ese mu Rwanda ndaruganae, nakunze mama ndamubura, shatsa bavandimwe sinababona, nitsunze rumbanda ruranigarika.